a hand stroking her hair. The sun was going down over a field of green. A cluster of birds were fluttering overhead, their calls echoing out over the landscape. I'm so happy to be here with you, Akame said. She looked up and nestled against him. Her father smiled down at her, but there were tears in his eyes. Don't cry, Daddy. She wanted to say, but then she tried to speak. The words did not come. She reached up to touch his face, but her hand passed through empty air. He was gone, and she was alone in the grass. Overhead, the birds began to wail, and their calls sounded like human voices, breaking in despair. Daddy! Charlie screamed, but there was no answer, only the birds' lamentation as the sun vanished beyond the horizon. It was dark, and he did not come back. All the birds were gone but one, and that one sounded more human than every cry. Charlie stood unsteadily. By some trick of some, she was no longer a child, but a teenage girl, and the fields around her had turned to rubble. She stood in the midst of a ruined place, but there was a single wall standing in front of her, and a door at the center of it. The birds were silent, but someone was crying on the other side of the door, crying alone in a small cramped space. She ran into it, banging her fist in the metal surface. Let me in, she cried. Let me in. I have to get inside. I have to get inside. Charlie sat bolt upright with a ragged gasp, inhaling like she just escaped from drowning. The doors, the closet. She threw off the gray wool blanket and the sheets, tangling herself in the process before she managed to get free. She was so hot she could barely stand it, and the wool had been scratching her where it had touched her chin. She felt strange, more alert. The world was in sharp focus, and it was jarring, as if she had been drifting in some kind of shadowy, so half-conscious state for days. Everything hurts. She managed to whisper to John, but it had been somehow detached from her. There was some buffer between her body and her mind. Now her mind cleared, the buffer was gone, and she ached all over, a dull, constant pain that seemed to be everywhere at once. She leaned against back against the wall. She had not woken in a sleepy disorientation. She knew exactly where she was. She was in John's apartment, behind the couch. She was behind the couch because someone is impersonating me, she said uncertainly, and the sound of her own voice rose startling in the empty room. She got to her knees, not quite trusting her legs, then steadied herself on the back of the couch, getting to her feet with effort. She strengthened and was instantly dizzy, her head swinging as her knees threatened to buckle under her. Charlie gripped the back of the couch determinedly, picking a point on the wall and staring at it, willing the room to stop spinning. After a moment, it did, and Charlie realized that the wall she was staring at was a door. Doors. The thought made her lightheaded again, but she kept a firm hand on the couch and made her way around to the front, then sat down on it carefully. She glanced around the room. So far, all she had seen was the corner behind the sofa. The shades were pulled down, and she could see that the front door was bolted. Charlie lost interest in the rest of it. Her eyes dropped down back to the other door. It was scarcely jarring. The room behind it dark, and Charlie shivered. Echoes of her dream reverberated in her head. Doors. Someone was on the other side, behind the door, somewhere small and dark. I was drawing them. Doors. I had to find the door. Then she closed her eyes, remembering. They were running this particular way as the building thundered around them, already falling in pieces, and she saw the door. The door called to me. It was hidden in the wall, but I went to it. I knew exactly where it was. As I walked toward it, it was like I was on both sides, walking to it, and trapped behind it, separated from myself. When I touched it, I could feel the beat of your heart, and then Charlie's eyes snapped open. John pulled me away, she said, the memory solidifying as she let herself dwell on it. I don't want to go because she heard it. Suddenly, the hiss and the cracks appearing in the wall, because the door had started to open. Charlie stood, her eyes glued to the door on John's living room. She approached as if propelled by the same instinctive force, her heart breaking at its pace. It's just the bedroom, right? She murmured, but still she edged it towards slowly. She stopped in front of the door and reached out tentatively, vaguely surprised when her fingers touched real wood. She pushed it gently and it swung open easily, revealing a girl identity identical to Charlie. A mirror. She looked the same. Her face was pale and strained, but it was her face, and she smiled indistinctly. In the haze of the last few days, weeks, she had been utterly disoriented, fading in and out of consciousness, pain finding her even in dreams. Charlie had not felt like herself, but there she was. She reached out to touch the mirror girl's hand. "You are you," she said quietly, but behind her came the unmistakable sound of a lock being turned, and she rolled around in a sign of panic, losing her balance and catching herself on John's dresser. The front door opened and she shrank back, kneeling to let the dresser shield her. A clamor of voices burst in, all taking at once were too many to make out the words until a familiar voice called, "Charlie?" Charlie didn't move, waiting to be sure. Footsteps came to the doorway of the bedroom, then the voice again. "Charlie?" "Marla," Charlie answered. "I'm here." She started to get up, but her legs would not take her weight. "I can't," she started, tears of frustration pricking her eyes as Marla hurried over. "It's okay," Marla said, hurried. "It's okay, I'll help. It's amazing you made it this far." Shirley looked at her flatly and Marla laughed. "I'm sorry," she said. "It's just glaring at me like you're so what? Charlie. Who else am I supposed to be?" Charlie smiled as Marla took hold of her wrist with medical authority and began to silently count. She looked past Marla to Carlton, who came over quickly. John was standing in the door, but he made no move to join them, not meeting Charlie's eyes. "I don't want to crowd you," Carlton said, sitting down beside her and crossing his legs. "Charlie, he broke off and swallowed, looking away. "I'm really glad to see you," he said to the floor. "I'm glad to see you too," Charlie said. She looked back to Marla, who nodded briskly. "Your pulse is a little slow," she said. "I want to check it again in a few minutes. I want you to drink some water." Charlie nodded. "Okay," she said bemusingly. "Let's get her onto the bed," Marla said to Carlton, who nodded and, before Charlie could protest, scooped her up into his arms. Charlie glanced around for John, but he had disappeared. Marla pulled the blankets back. Charlie felt the pull of sleep, like something standing behind her, gently tugging. She blinked rapidly, trying to rouse herself as Carlton set her down. Marla started to pull the blankets over her, and Charlie waved her hands, unaffectionately trying to push them away. "I'm too hot," she said, and Marla stopped. "Okay," she said. "They're here if you need them." Charlie nodded. The tugging was growing stronger. If she just closed her eyes, she would slip back into the dark. Marla and Carlton were talking to each other, but it was getting hard to keep track of what they were saying. A loud bang rattled in the small apartment, and Charlie jolted awake, her heart thudding alarmingly. Almost instantly, Marla's hand was on her shoulder. "It's just John," she said. "I think my heart rate is back up," Charlie said, attempting to joke, but Marla turned her with her appraising eyes, grabbed her wrist, and started to count again. "Marla, I'm fine," Charlie said, half finally pulling away. Marla held on for another few seconds, then released her. In the living room, John set something down on the floor with force. Carlton gave Charlie a concerned glance, then helped her off the bed, giving her an arm to lean on as they went into the living room to join John. For a moment, the object was obscured. Then they all moved aside so they could see the child-sized doll. Charlie sat down on the floor, a little apart from the others. "Ella," she whispered. Some tight, painful knot inside her chest began to loosen, and she felt herself smile. "John, how did you find her?" she asked. John knelt down behind the doll and looked up at her grimly and Her smile faded. "What's wrong?" she asked. He didn't answer. "Everyone, keep your eyes on the doll," he said instead and took something out of his pocket. He flipped he flicked his thumb against the object. A tiny motion and the air around Ella shimmered for a moment, blurring her. Charlie rubbed her eyes and heard Mala gasp. Ella was gone. Standing where she had been was a little girl about 3 years old, dressed in Ella's clothes. The knot in Charlie's chest started to tighten again. "What is this, John?" Marla asked sharply. John flicked his thumb again, and the shimmer passed over the girl. Then she was a doll again, her vacant eyes staring up pleasantly into eternity. Shirley darted her eyes from one to the next. Marla looked scared, but Carlton was fascinated. John, for some reason, seemed angry. Charlie shifted uneasily. John manipulated the object in his hand again, and the little girl appeared once more. Carlton crouched down to look at her, and Marla bent down to see, keeping her distance. John stood, leaving them to stare at Ella and knelt beside Charlie, giving her the same dark look he had since he brought in the doll. "What is this?" he asked harshly, and Charlie stared at him, hurt. John looked away with a pained expression. His face flushed. Then he looked back at Charlie. The anger in his face had faded, but was not gone. "I need to know what this is." "I don't know," she said. John nodded and sat on the floor with her. Carefully leaving a wide space between them, he opened his hand. In it was a small flat disc. Charlie didn't move to touch it. There was something odd in his manner, something untrusting she had never seen in him before. "Did you know?" "No." Charlie tilted her head, staring at the motionless little girl. "It's the same as Afton's creatures, though, isn't it?" Charlie said. "Pattern projection, bombarding the mind, overwhelming the senses." "This one is different, though," Charlie cut in. She shivered, though she wasn't cold. Suddenly unable to shake the memory of the twisted bear, his face stripped to the metal staves, the illusion sparking on and off as he loomed over them. "Can I see it?" she said, forcing herself back to the present. John let out the disc, and she took it carefully, watching him warily. He was getting out the sense of a brilliant storm, and she was afraid of setting it off. Charlie held the disc up to the light, turned it back and forth, then handed it back. "That's it?" John's eyes widened. "What do you want me to say?" she cried. "I mean, you can't tell me anything about it?" The others all had the inscription, After Robotics. This one doesn't, but I bet you noticed that. "Actually, I didn't." John looked at her thoughtfully, then, back down at the disc. He flipped the switch, and Marla yelped in surprise. "Sorry, it's a bit jarring if you aren't expecting it," he said, turning to Charlie with a grin. She smiled as he met her eyes. His smile flattered, something troubling passing over his face, but before she could speak, it was gone. He grinned widely and winked at her, then flipped the switch. Marla cried out again, and Carlton laughed. "Stop doing that!" Marla shouted from several feet away. John ignored her and leaned in closer to Charlie, hesitantly like he thought she might run away. She turned to face him, a wave of nervousness washing over her. She took her head, letting her hair fall over her face, and he reached out and touched it gently, brushing a strand out of her eyes. He gave her a small smile and flipped the switch once, then again. "That's enough," Marla called. "This is too weird for me." John didn't seem to hear her. He was looking at Charlie with a new troubled expression. "What is it?" she asked quietly. "Nothing," he said. He touched her hair again, this time brushing it back from her face and tucking it behind her ear. "Hey," he said abruptly, changing his tone. "Do you remember your experiment from last year?" She nodded eagerly, then stopped, freshly aware of how long she had been away. "My faces, but they must be gone. Everything must be gone." She looked at John with anxious eyes, but he smiled. "Nothing's gone," he said, and her heart lifted. She felt as if he had just given her a gift. "Jessica packed up all your stuff, and she's got in your apartment." "Oh," Charlie said, darting her eyes around the room. "Jessica? Where is she?" Charlie, John said patiently, and she tried to focus on him. She could feel her attention waning, as if her mind were spreading thin, flying like clouds. The faces, John went on. There's an earpiece so they could recognize you, right? She nodded. You can make it work the other way? Charlie thought for a moment, then met his eyes again. You mean, make it so that the animatronics can't see you? She frowned, her focus returning as she concentrated on the problem. The earpieces emit a frequency that alerts the animatronics to you. It makes you visible. If you inverted that frequency, she paused again. I don't know if it would work. John, it might. It will make us invisible to them? Maybe, but that's a big leap. How would I do it? Invert the frequency? Charlie shrugged. Just switch the wires and. Charlie, what part of staying in bed wasn't clear? Marla asked good naturedly, coming over to them. John stood, his mouth hanging open as though Marla had interrupted Charlie's answer. But she didn't seem poised to add more. Sorry, he said hastily. Be careful, Charlie said. She was beginning to feel lightheaded again, and when Marla reached out to help her back to the bedroom, she did not protest. John paused in the door, watching as Charlie curled up on her side. Her eyes already closed. Marla raised her eyebrows and he left, shutting the door halfway. In the living room, Carlton was kneeling beside Ella, now in doll form again and looking intentionally into her ear. Carlton, John said doubtfully, and Carlton sat back on his heels. Amazing, he said. She looked human, like actually for a real, a human child. Yeah, I think that was the idea. Can we talk outside? John asked recklessly, and Carlton looked at him in surprise. Sure, Carlton said with some concern in his voice. Come on. John headed for the door, and Carlton hurried after him. Once they were outside, John looked at Carlton for a moment, thinking. What's the idea? Carlton asked with a hint of suspicion. Let me try to get this straight in my own head first, John said. Last year, when she was still in school, Charlie had this experiment she was doing. Something about techniquing teaching robots language. Oh yeah, Carlton nodded enthusiastically. She told me about it. Natural language programming. They listen to people talking around them and to them, and they learn to talk too. Doesn't sound like it worked very well though. Yeah, well, whatever. She had these earpieces, like the robots would only talk to each other. They only recognize each other. You with me so far? I think. Well, if you, Carlton, wanted to be in on the conversation, you would need to wear a special earpiece. The earpieces will make them recognize you. Otherwise, you were just part of the background, like they couldn't see you. Okay? Carlton gave him a puzzled look, and John rolled his eyes. Wearing the earpieces, including you in their conversation, and made you one of them from their perspective. Hate to break it to you, but the big ones already see us. At least, I'm pretty sure they do. See the scar? Will you shut up for a second? John said. I asked Charlie, and she said we might be able to reverse engineer it. We can switch the wires and instead of the earpieces, including us, it will be deliberately exclude us. Carlton furrowed his brow. It could effectually make us invisible, John prompted. Switch the wires. Carlton repeated. It will mask us, and not make us a part of the world they can perceive. Right, John nodded. Carlton waited for John to go on, then added, what do you want me to do? Go to Jessica's house. She's got all of Charlie's old stuff boxed up in a closet. If she's not there, she leaves her spare key under the welcome mat. Carlton raised his eyebrows. Under the welcome mat? That's a horrible place to have a key. It's a good neighborhood, John said defensively. Carlton raised his eyebrows. Yeah, it's a good neighborhood, John. Nothing bad ever happens here. Carlton slapped John on the shoulder as he headed for his car. I'm on it, he called. John led it outside, then went back inside. Marla was sitting on the couch, staring at the television, which was not turned on. How is she? John asked, sitting down beside her, and she shrugged.